All right, good evening, everybody. Because we're talking about such a vibrant topic tonight of hope, I figured I'd wear this shirt. All right, so we are continuing to look at our evidences classes where we're looking at reasons why we should take Christianity seriously and how we might respond to skeptics and atheists and even challenge any degree of skepticism we might have in ourselves. And I just want to tell you that after tonight, these classes are going to begin to shift in their emphasis. So classes 2 through 5, what we've been doing is taking universal human needs and showing how if you're a secular person who doesn't have God, how would you try to have meaning in life or a self-understanding identity? How would you have a good reason to care about morality? And then tonight we're talking about hope. And like we've been doing with these first few classes, we're looking at what skeptics and atheists have said about how they try to find these deep needs in their life, and then we compare the biblical worldview. So these are what I like to call subjective evidences for the faith, that Christianity makes best sense of your deepest needs. After we look at these evidences, it should help people want Christianity to be true. And if you want Christianity to be true, then you're ready for the more classical reasons to believe in Christianity. So you've got Matt Finley next week is going to be talking about reasons to believe why God exists. And then we're going to talk about some other things that are common questions people will bring up, like the problem of evil and suffering. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? How do the fulfilled prophecies in the Bible show that the Bible's trustworthy? And again, I'm still open if anybody's got other things that they want to talk about in those classes. I'm open to that. But that's going to be what it's set at for now unless I hear otherwise. So I just want to remind us, though, we've looked at some of these passages before, but in the Gospel of John, Jesus would appeal to people based on their deep emotional needs. And so that's what we're trying to do in these classes. It's also what the book of Ecclesiastes does. But in John 4:14, to the woman at the well, whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. John 7:37, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. If you do not have Jesus in your life, you are thirsting. That is true about anybody who's not a Christian. If you're not following Jesus, what you are following is a thief who's stealing, killing, and destroying things from your life. And so those kinds of things would be our need for meaning in life, our need for identity, our need for hope, like we're looking at tonight. And so I just want to point out that as we look at this last class that's going to be in this style, that Jesus would appeal to people based on their deep needs. Let's see here. Let's review this question. What are some of the causes of skepticism that we've been looking at in these classes? Peer pressure, good. So if you're around a lot of people, let's say that you're in a college setting and you're getting like a ultra super master's degree or something like that, and you're around a lot of ultra super smart people that all think that God is not real and all that sort of thing, are you going to be willing to be the one person in class that endures the 30 years of schooling and be willing to be made fun of the whole time? Probably not. So it's the reason why there's a correlation between higher education and a greater likelihood of being an unbeliever is, I think, has less to do with rational thinking and more to do with peer pressure. What are some other causes of skepticism? Yeah, desire to sin. Like, I want to be able to commit this sin. I don't like what the Bible teaches about whatever this moral issue might be. And maybe it's not that I want to commit that sin, but I want my friends who commit those sins I want to think that they're okay with God. So we got desire to sin, peer pressure. What's another one? Yeah, hypocrisy or bad religious experience. So we got, in my experience, 90% of skeptics I've studied with, that's really what's going on. It's one of those things that's causing their arguments to be things that they believe in. So when people come and say, I don't believe that God really exists because of all these reasons, I don't believe that the Bible's true because of all these reasons, 90% of the time, I think it's one of those things that's actually happening. And it would be a distraction for us to just track down and give them 6,000 reasons to believe in the Bible when it's probably one of these things that's actually going on. Any comments or questions about the causes of skepticism? This is why we try to give emotional reasons to believe. All of these reasons for skepticism are emotional reasons to not believe. Even though the skeptic would like to think of themselves as being very rational, it's probably that they have an emotional reason why they're not a believer. Or do you say something, Andrew?
In your studies with atheists or skeptics, what questions do you ask to pinpoint if it's one of these three?
Yeah, this is a good question. So what questions could you ask people to try to figure out which of these are the causes of their skepticism? For a desire to sin, I would ask the question, is there something that the Bible teaches that you don't like? And if they go, yeah, I really hate what it says about, in our culture right now, it's sexual ethics is a big one, homosexuality, transgenderism, anything to do with sexuality is a big reason that would happen. But if you're trying to figure out if it was a bad religious experience, you just ask, what was your religious upbringing like? What's your religious background like? And they would tell you about that sort of thing. Or if you just ask them, tell me about your friends. What do your friends believe about these things? And those would be ways to try to diagnose maybe what's behind their skepticism. All right, so for tonight, we're looking at our need for hope. So let's start out with this question, with this topic. Can you give me some evidence that in our culture, there's a lot of hopelessness? Secular people they all know that they need hope. We all live our life in anticipation of what we think about the future. So in our growingly secular society, what are some evidences that we don't have much hope? Yeah.
Suicide.
Yeah, good. Suicide rates are increasing. What else? By the way, anybody know which group of people is having the most increased amount of suicide rates? Transgenders. It's teenage girls, since social media has risen. Since the iPhone has come out and social media has come out, and you're constantly scrolling, looking at all these perfect lives that other people have, which we all know that there's filters, and nobody's going to post pictures or videos of them being really angry at somebody or something like that. It's always going to be seeing people at their best. If you look at that all day long and you keep comparing your life to that, you're going to feel pretty bad about yourself. And that affects women more than men, but it affects men as well. That's what, you can go read people like Jonathan Haidt, sociologists that have done all the research on that kind of thing, and they're really big about pointing that kind of thing out. Okay, what other evidences are there that in our culture there's a lack of hope? Yes, declining birth rates. When people are less willing to bring children into the world, oftentimes it's a symptom of thinking that global warming is going to destroy the world, or we're all going to die from a solar flare or something like that. Why would I want to bring my child into something like that? So when birth rates decline in a nation, that's oftentimes connected to a lack of hope. We also had the increasing suicide rates. I'll also include increasing SSRI rates, that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That would be like anxiety medication, antidepressants, stuff like that. I'm not saying that everybody who's on things like that has a biblical lack of hope. There are some people that have feelings that they don't know how they can track down and all that sort of thing. I wouldn't want to criticize everybody who's on that. But at the same time, it would be naive to say that the increasing rates of that stuff has nothing to do with a lack of hope. So, any other comments or questions? So, clearly in our society, we live in a pretty hopeless world. And Jesus, again, would appeal to people based on your deep needs. So, we're going to ask the question, how would the person who doesn't have God think through how they would get hope? And what's wrong with those approaches? And then we'll contrast that to the biblical worldview. Does anybody have any comments or questions about any of this before we start looking at the quotes from atheists? Yeah. Yeah, alcohol and drugs, trying to dull yourself would be another thing that would fit into that same category. Good. All right, before we start looking at the quotes from skeptics, let's go ahead and ask God to be with us as we study these things. Our great Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We pray that as we consider the hopelessness that the secular worldview gives people, that we would be better equipped to be able to talk to our non-Christian friends, that if we are tempted to find our meaning based on the same ways that people of the world do, that those things would be corrected in our hearts. Help us to think about these things critically and put all of our hope in your Son, Jesus, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Okay, secular approach to finding hope. The first approach to finding hope is to try to leave the world a better place, which I think a Christian wants to do the same thing. The problem is that if you're doing it without God, it doesn't ultimately matter. Catherine Osmond is a woman who wrote a book called Grace Without God. And in the book, she's talking about how she has left the Christian faith and how she's trying to find all of her reasons to have hope and meaning in life without God. And this is part of the book where she says this: we believe in making the world a better place. We believe in evidence over faith. We believe in reason as a way to address problems. We believe in helping others because that makes the world better for everybody. In the context of this quote, she talks about how she is a secular humanist. Now, if you are a Buddhist, what do you believe in? The teachings of who? Buddha. If you're a Hinduist, what do you believe in the teachings of? Hinduism. If you're a humanist, what do you believe in? Human beings. That we can solve all of the world's problems if we come together, and we can stop all the problems of the world if we just put our biggest experts together, and if we all contribute our little things that we can contribute, we can leave the world a better place. And so that is one of the ways that secular people try to say, okay, this is my sense of hope. That we all know we're going to die, but my dying breaths, if I can know that I made some contribution to the world to make it a better place, then I'll feel really good about myself. We're going to start to deconstruct this, but does anybody have anything they want to add to how people have fleshed out this way of trying to find hope in life? Does that sound pretty accurate, pretty fair? I mean, that's an atheist saying it. All right, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of in Ecclesiastes when he talks about like how it's in vain just to leave what you've done for the next 20 years.
Yes, and Ecclesiastes is going to blow this idea apart too by saying, like, when you die, you're going to leave everything to other people who didn't even work for these things, and so on and so on. And that's frustrating too to think about those things. All right, so what are some of the problems with, I'm a secular person, I don't believe that there's an afterlife, I don't believe that there's a God, but my hope is to leave the world a better place. Okay, what are the problems with this? First of all, you can see this illustrated really well with some quotes from H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells wrote a lot of different kinds of literature. He wrote The Time Machine. He wrote a book on the history of the world, and it was 2 volumes, and each volume was like over 1,000 pages. So then he made like a more concise version of the books into one book. Look what he says before World War II. This was after World War I. By the way, you guys know that World War I, they didn't call it World War I at the time because they weren't anticipating a sequel. So they called it the Great War after World War I. And so H.G. Wells wrote this after World War I. Can we doubt that presently our race will more than realize our boldest imaginations, that it will achieve unity and peace, that it will live the children of our blood, and lives will live in a world made more splendid and lovely than any palace or garden that we know, going on from strength to strength in an ever-widening circle of adventure and achievement? What man has done, the little triumphs of his present state, and all of this history we have told, form but the prelude to the things that man has yet to do. All right, so after World War I is done, H.G. Wells has this perspective that we've gotten all of our killing out of our system, and now it's just all onward and upward, and we're going to make the world a better place, all that. So what happens over the next 23 years? World War II happens. And you've got more video camera systems and ability to take more pictures and everything. And so all across the world, more and more people are seeing the atrocities of things involving World War II. And so what do you think H.G. Wells would feel like after World War II happens? Pretty hopeless. Like, you know what? I thought we were going to make the world a better place. You know, why is it that young people jump onto every social movement that they can jump onto? And they get all excited about this thing that's happening in society, and I'm going to make my banner on social media this thing so people know that I stand behind this or that, and we're going to make a difference. No, you're really not going to. And maybe what you just haven't seen yet is the true horror and ugliness of people. You think that you're going to make the world a better place, and then World War II happens, and H.G. Wells writes a very short book before he dies called The Mind at the End of Its Tether. Makes sense why it's titled that, but here's what he says in the book. The cold-blooded massacres of the defenseless, the return of deliberate and organized torture, mental torment, and fear to a world from which such things had seemed well-nigh banished, has come near to breaking my spirit altogether. Homo sapiens, as he has been pleased to call himself, is played out. What do you think H.G. Wells, if H.G. Wells could talk to Catherine Osmond, who says, I'm a secular humanist and we want to make the world a better place, and then World War II happens, what do you think H.G. Wells would tell Catherine Osmond?
Humans don't have the answer.
We don't have the answer. We're not going to make things better. Look at the atrocities that are constantly happening. I think more things happen in culture and society, more under the table. People have gotten better at maybe hiding some things. But there's wicked things happening all the time. And for you to think that it's going to be onward and upward and we're going to make some great contribution to the world that's going to make it all better, no, you're probably not. Let's just say for a minute, though, that you could make the world a better place. But you still don't believe that there's an afterlife. You don't believe in God. How about this? Let's say that I'm on an airplane and it's a Boeing because Boeing's having lots of problems. And so we're on a Boeing airplane, and I'm with a bunch of other people, and we got 7 minutes before we crash into a mountain. And I go, well, I got 7 minutes, so I'm going to go use the restroom, and you don't know how to open the door. You do the little thing, and do you push in or do you push out? It's like every plane's different. But you eventually figure it out, now you got 3 minutes until it crashes. But you try to go to you close the door, and the light doesn't turn on when you close the door. Remember, how you lock it and it opens. So there's no light that's working. And then you go back out to where everybody's sitting, and you talk to the steward human, because you can't say stewardess. So you talk to the steward human, and you say, hey, steward human, what's going on with the light in the bathroom? We got to fix this light so we can make the plane a better place. And what's the steward human going to say? Why does it matter? We're all going to crash and die anyways. So on a much grander scale, if your worldview says a solar flare is going to eradicate all consciousness, or global warming is going to kill us all and none of us are going to be here anymore, we are just an airplane that's going to crash. Why does it even matter to you that you'd make the world a better place? Your worldview doesn't even support you doing that. So, any comments or questions on you just haven't seen a world war happen yet. You haven't seen the wickedness of men. You're so naive to think that you're really going to make a huge difference. You're not going to. And if you could, it's not going to matter anyways. Any comments or questions on that first critique? Okay. Look at another critique to this perspective. Timothy Keller says this. Imagine how ludicrous it would have been to sit down with a group of early 19th century slaves and say, there will never be a judgment day in which wrongdoing will be put right. There is no future world and life in which your desires will ever be satisfied. This life is all there is. When you die, you simply cease to exist. Our only real hope for a better world lies in improved social policy. Now, with these things in mind, go out there, keep your head high, and live a life of courage and love. Don't give in to despair. You want to do that? Can you imagine going back to the late 1700s, mid 1800s, and going up to a group of slaves and say, hey guys, just want you to know I got done with college, I learned some things that you don't know. There is no God, there's no final judgment day, all that sort of thing. How about you just try to put your hope in making better social policies? And what could they say back to you? What was that? Liar, yeah, what were you saying? Are you joking? Yeah. Have we talked about in any of these classes Howard Thurman's book? I forgot the name of the book. It'll come to me. Have we talked about a book by a guy named Howard Thurman? Okay. There's a book. This guy was a denominational preacher, and his mom was a slave in Georgia at one point. And the book opens up with the preacher's traveling to India. And there's a man in India who's asking him a question. And the question that he's asking Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited, is the title of the book. It's a really good book. I recommend it. So Howard Thurman's talking to a man from India, and the man from India says to him, "You're an American preacher, and you're black, and your mom was a slave. You look weak to me." And Howard Thurman says, "Why do I look weak to you?" And the Indian man says, "Because you adopted the religion of your captors. You guys have adopted some form of Christianity. Where you didn't hear about Jesus when you guys lived in Africa. You guys heard about Jesus from your slave masters." And so the whole book is answering the question, why would Jesus be compelling to slaves when they're learning about Jesus from their slave masters? Have you ever thought about that question before, by the way? Any ideas why Jesus would be a compelling figure to slaves when they're having slave masters bark out orders and misusing passages about slavery to their face? Why would they still believe it? Andrew? Yes, it gives them hope. What else?
He's going to free them. He's going to make everything right. He's going to make all the wrong right. Heaven's going to be the great equalizer. No matter what happens to us in this life, if we can get over there, it's bliss.
Yes. Jesus is such a compelling, and what Howard Thurman argues in the book is that we're an oppressed minority and Jesus was an oppressed minority. And even though we heard hypocritical people reading these passages in Scripture, we couldn't help but think about how attractive he was with his teachings and the hope that he gave. So you want to go, the kind of people that would say, "Yeah, I'm just going to make the world a better place." The only reason you can say that is because you have the ability, you think, to make a difference. You can't go to people that have no hope to do anything in this life and say that you want this world to be at a better place. The only reason you can say that is because you're at a point of privilege. But most people in the world can't make that their worldview. So that's another problem with this approach. So I want to try to make the world a better place. Number one, you just haven't really you're naive to think that you're not really going to make a difference. Or number two, if you could make a difference, it wouldn't ultimately matter in your worldview anyways. And number three, this approach can't apply to most people in the world. Any other comments or questions about, I want to try to make the world a better place? All right, here is the second approach that a secular person would say, this is how I find hope, is that I have to embrace death as a natural part of life. When Samantha and I and Asher and Abigail lived in San Diego, every Friday, so I work between services on Sunday, and then I work Monday through Thursday, so our weekend is Friday, Saturday. That's why if you guys ever see me at like Sam's Club on a Friday, I always feel guilty, like you guys think I'm being lazy or something, and I have to let everybody know I take Fridays and Saturdays off. That's what's going on. So, but there was one time when we were in San Diego, and we were at a coffee shop on a Friday morning, and there was a woman that worked at a hotel or a hospital, and she counseled people as they were dying. And she was an atheist. But she said, I try to be respectful of every worldview on how they would help people like deal with death. And so we emailed a couple times about how the Christian worldview thinks about death and dying. And her perspective was that she tries to counsel people who are not religious to accept death as a natural part of life. That it's actually a beautiful thing when you think about it from a natural perspective. Catherine Osmond, the same person that we quoted earlier, has got a quote similar to this, where she says this: "Our bodies decompose, falling back into the earth, merging with all other matter that makes up our planet. In the future, our decomposed bodies might provide nutrients to the trees. Someone might hang a swing from one of those trees, or sit beneath the shade of its leafy branches, or make a painted horse from its wood." Isn't that cute? You know, guys, there's no eternal existence, but you could become a horse. Isn't that nice? There's like some states now that are letting your ashes or your remains be buried to start forming a tree. This view, you may not have heard somebody say this view yet, but it's becoming more and more common in our culture right now. I'll give you an older example just in our culture where this view is shown. Remember the movie Lion King? The good one. In 1994, you got this conversation between Mufasa and young Simba. So look at this dialogue that they have. Mufasa, everything you see exists together in a delicate balance. As king, you need to understand that balance and respect all the creatures, from the crawling ant to the leaping antelope. All right, so here's dad training his young son. Hey, you're going to be the king one day. You got to respect, all the animals and everything. And his son has got a really good question. But dad, don't we eat the antelope? Sharp kid. Good question. And then his dad says this. Well, yes, Simba, but let me explain. When we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass, and so we're all connected to the great circle of life. And then you have the circle of life song and all that sort of thing. And it's supposed to be beautiful. And so this view, you will no longer be you, but you're like the Buddhist says, you're like a dewdrop going back into the ocean. And so you get to be brought back into the totality of the universe, and you get to be part of something bigger than yourself. And you should embrace that. Has anybody heard people talk this way? There's Netflix shows that are showing this worldview more and more now as well. Anybody heard that? Okay, all right. So let's start showing what's wrong with this approach. Number one, you have no control over your remains. So Catherine Osmond and Mufasa and young Simba, both of those quotes show that I really put a lot of hope in what will happen to my physical remains. All right, so how about this? So how about you feed a tree, and you get, it has the potential to have a swing hung on it, but instead this tree gets cut down, and it gets brought to Louisville, where they make baseball bats. And somebody takes you, and they make a baseball bat out of it. And then they put barbed wire around it. And then they go and start killing a bunch of people with it. You have no control over your remains, but yet this is what you're putting hope in. You don't know what's really going to happen to your remains. And so it's just, and by the way, when Mufasa dies in Lion King, where is it that he dies? You guys remember? When he's stampeded, do you think he's going to become the grass? No, he's like in the bottom of this rocky valley. He's not going to become the grass anyways. So it looks like his hope didn't work out for him either. I know that's kind of cold to say that, but it's true in the show. So that's the first problem. You don't really get to control what happens to you after you die. But here's another problem. No matter what you choose to believe or what good or evil actions you take in life, we all end exactly where we began, as stardust, like a drop of water falling back into the ocean. That, my friends, is the real horror. Now, I forget who this is quoting from, but in the context of this quote, the writer was making the point that if you think that there is no final judgment day, there is no God to whom you answer, in the final analysis, what is the difference between Mao Zedong and the Apostle Paul? Do you want to have a worldview that says that there's no difference between Ted Bundy and Jesus Christ? That's what you have to conclude. He was a serial murderer, by the way. There's no qualitative difference, because you're going to both be six feet under the ground, or you're going to feed a tree, or whatever it's going to be. That's the more horrifying worldview. That there is no final justice, which is ironic because a lot of people put their hope in, we want justice and improved social policies and all these. You understand this need for justice in this life, but at the same time, your worldview eradicates and eliminates any final full justification or justice. Comments or questions on that? Make sense? All right, here's another problem with this. This idea of embracing death as a beautiful part of life flies in the face of what 1 Corinthians 15, 25 and 26 says. Talking about Christ, he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. What does the Bible teach that death is in this passage? It's an enemy. Have you guys ever seen somebody die before? Have you ever seen somebody know that they're going to be dying soon? Do they just have a big smile all the time, even if they've been a Christian? Do they just have a really big smile and go, you know what, this is just so beautiful? Do you remember when COVID was happening and all the news networks were showing how United States had foam finger number 1, we had number 1 death count and everything like this? Was everybody looking at the death count going, what a beautiful thing. Our country has the most deaths, and death is just a beautiful natural part of life. No, because we all instinctively know that death is an enemy, like what this passage says. And so to accept death as a beautiful part of life is not even close to what the Christian can do, or what anybody can really do. And so those are a lot of the weaknesses of that perspective. Any comments or questions on any of that? Yes? Yeah, there's been noted atheists like Antony Flew, who used to write against the existence of God, and when he got closer to death, he changed all of his views on this kind of thing. Yeah.
Lose a child, you'll learn that death is not beautiful.
Say that again?
Lose a child,
Oh.
find out that death is not beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, and this view, the embracing death as a natural part of life and everything, it's also very lacking in compassion for people who know people who have passed on. Death is an enemy. It's an intruder that Jesus is going to ultimately defeat when we all rise from the graves and then we're judged. Any other thoughts or comments on this perspective? Okay, let's then look at the biblical approach to hope. So so you're not going to make the world a better place. Even if you could, it wouldn't matter anyways. Embracing death as a natural part of life goes against our instincts. You don't get to control your remains anyways, and there's no justice anymore. So, can you imagine like studying with a skeptic and you're showing them that their worldview is pretty terrible? You'd want to replace it with something better. So look at a couple passages in the New Testament on this, the biblical approach to hope. 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, so we will always be with the Lord. All right. I want to highlight some of the words that are used here. Look at at the end of verse 16, the dead in Christ will rise first. And then verse 17, then we who are alive will be caught up together with them. The biblical worldview does not say that when you die, you're like a dewdrop going back into the ocean, or like you're like ashes that are scattered. It says that you will always get to be you. You will never stop being you. You will always be you, but when the Lord returns, you will be you in a perfected state. Now, the secular worldview says there will be no more consciousness. You will not exist anymore. And all your memories and all the deeds that you've done, there will be no reward, there will be no justice. And then the Bible teaches that you will always get to be you. All right, so that's one thing to say about it. But you get to be you with other saints who have passed on. So it's going to, what we need after we die is not just to have consciousness, because people who go to hell will have consciousness. What we need after we die is belonging and community and to be loved. And we're going to be with people that have been transformed to be perfect. Our experience in this life with loving other people is agonizing. It's difficult to love people in this life. I remember before Asher was born, there was a woman at the church in San Diego who said, right before Asher was born, and she said, as soon as that child is born, you can only be as happy as he's happy. Like to be married, to have children, it's like your heart is tied to the well-being and the happiness of all of these other people, and now you don't have as much autonomy as you used to have. So love on earth can be agonizing because you can only be as happy as the people that you love are, because if they're struggling, then you're thinking about those things. Have you ever had a time before where you loved somebody but they didn't reciprocate it? I'm not even talking about romantic love, but like friendship even. You're trying to pursue friendships with people, but they're not reciprocating it back to you. That can be agonizing. And then you have times where you got to move and leave people behind that you love a lot. When I was a new Christian, the song Blessed Be the Tie That Binds, there's part of that song that says, when we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, or brings us inward pain. I used to think when I was a new Christian that meant every time we left the building on Sundays or Wednesdays, it's so hard to have to say goodbye and wait a few more days to see everybody. And then I realized that song was about when people die. But have you ever had to move away from people that you loved a lot, and you know that you're probably not going to see them again, maybe ever? Like that makes love difficult. Well, here's the hope that the Christian has. All of that love that you show people is not in vain, because one day you're going to be with the saints forever. And even if we couldn't always fully get along in this life, God will so transform us where we won't be able to sin anymore, and we will all get along perfectly. Now, there's a lot to say about this passage, but it's the main point is not even that you'll be with other people. Some people wonder, am I going to be able to recognize fellow Christians in heaven? I think this passage is written to show that when you die and when the Lord does return, there are people that you're going to have a reunion with. It's written to encourage people in that way. But what the end of this passage says, that you'll always be with who? The Lord. That's the best part of the afterlife. If you go, like, all of the natural light outside emanates from the sun. All of the love you've ever experienced in life has emanated from Jesus. Even if it's from a non-Christian who did a nice thing for you. Why is it that there's kindness and love in the world? Because God first loved people. And so what hell is to have all of the good things you had in life that God was hoping would persuade you to become a Christian. All of those good things are sucked out of your life, and you're left in outer darkness with weeping and gnashing of teeth. But God is the God of comfort. He's the refuge for the oppressed. He's the father to the fatherless. He's the light of the world. He's all these beautiful descriptions in the Bible, and the Bible teaches you will be with him from whom all love has ever flowed. Does that sound a little bit better than you might be a wooden horse? And you're not going to be you anymore? This is wildly better. Any comments or questions on that? Yeah.
Also, in Mark, when Transfiguration on the Mount, they recognize the people.
Yes, good point.
And these are people from the past. This is Elijah and Moses.
Yes.
They don't know, like the apostles don't know.
They had name tags.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And
I don't know.
so it's clear that we're going to be a community with people from thousands of years ago. that
Yes.
we've never met.
Yeah, good. Gavin was bringing up that in the Transfiguration of Christ, that Moses and Elijah were there, and Peter recognizes these guys. Was it because they had name tags? I don't know. No, probably not. But somehow they were able to do that. And so that would be a suggestion that in the afterlife we will be able to recognize each other. All right, anything else you guys want to say about the biblical sense of hope? Do you get a sense from this that if you're around people at the workplace or maybe family members that aren't Christians, that these people, they're really thinking that what's going to give me hope is that I can leave the world a better place, or I'm going to feed a tree one day. Do you realize how starved people are that don't have the Lord? We talked before about being made in God's image and that our mission is to reflect the glory of God. 1 John chapter 3 verse 2 says this, "Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is." Can you imagine that? You know, why is it the case in the Old Testament that when God comes on Mount Sinai, he comes in a cloud, and there's earthquake and rumbling? Does he come in a cloud to further intimidate people? Or in 1 Kings chapter 8, when God's glory comes onto the temple that Solomon is dedicating, he comes in a cloud. Why does God come in a cloud and veil himself like that? What happens if you see all of God's glory? You're dead. What happens when a father is wrestling with his 3-year-old son and uses all of his strength on the kid? He's going to be really badly hurt. So the father has to condescend to the child and use an amount of strength that the kid can handle and is not going to hurt him and everything like that. When God comes down, he's making efforts to not further intimidate people, because if you saw him in all of his glory, you would die. And even with the glimpse, why is it that lamps have a lampshade? To cover some of the light, so it doesn't blind you. When Jesus came in the form of a man, it was like his flesh was veiling his glory. And then on the Mount of Transfiguration, he shows some of his muscles there, but even at that point, not all of them. So the times in the Bible where God appears to people, or people get a glimpse of him, nobody's seen him in all of his glory, because if you did, you would die. And when Moses saw a greater amount of God's glory, what happened to his face in 2 Corinthians, according to that passage? It was shining, but even then he wasn't seeing all of the glory of God. So the biblical hope is you're going to be so transformed where you will be able to look at him as he really is. This image that you've been seeking to grow in, every time you grow in your holiness, you're getting a little bit of a taste of what you're fully going to become. But if you wanted to live on the moon without a suit or anything, you'd need a different kind of body. If you want to be able to see God in all of his glory, you need a resurrected body that's animated by the Spirit of God, which is what 1 Corinthians 15 says that you're going to have. You're going to be so transformed to be able to finally see him, the one from whom all love has ever flowed, in all of his glory. Doesn't that make you want to know him as well as you can? And doesn't that make you more and more appalled at trying to find hope without him? Were you going to say something, Andrew?
I was just going to add on to that. Even when Jesus appeared to Saul and Paul, he was blinded.
Yeah. Paul was blinded for 3 days. Yes, with this a glimpse of his glory. What would all of his glory do? What would like an atomic bomb? Like, have you seen pictures of when they experimented with the gadget, with Oppenheimer and everything? Like, they had to have glasses on when all of this kind of thing happened. And God is infinitely more powerful than an atomic bomb, but we're going to be suited with bodies that can see him. Yeah.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, he's gone to extraordinary lengths to reveal himself.
Yes.
And to communicate with us, and yet oftentimes we're just so busy down here with our stuff.
Right.
We don't even bother to read his word.
Right. Yeah, and we've got his book. From this great God. If your favorite author came out with a new book next week, you'd want to go read that. What about the Lord? And all the things that he's revealed to us. So you see the overall point, though, that with a secular worldview, you can understand why there's increase in depression. And again, I understand there's times where people just don't even understand why they're sad, and we all get days like that, and we can even have seasons like that. But again, it would be naive to say that everybody that has anxiety or despairs, it has nothing to do with how they view the world. Of course it does. For many people, of course it would. I'm not saying that for everybody, though. Any other thoughts or comments on any of this? All right. This is the last class that's going to be looking at these kinds of philosophical sort of arguments. We're going to be shifting to the objective arguments next week on reasons to believe in God. I will still say that these classes will still be a little bit higher intellectually and philosophically than maybe other classes you've had before on evidences. And so keep your thinking caps on for these classes, because we're going to continue looking at some things that when I study with atheists, this is how I try to reason with them. I'm doing a gospel meeting in Butler County next week, so Maddie Finns is going to be teaching on the existence of God, but we are done for tonight. So thank you guys for the good discussion.